Hello and welcome to the Small Business Briefing. I'm Brian Kelly, CEO of the Small Business Association of Michigan.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Sarah Miller, Vice President of Marketing and Strategic Communications at SBAM. We have quite a few topics to get through today. And so, Brian, let's start with yesterday's meeting of the Federal Reserve. So the decision to keep interest rates level was no surprise, but there have been previous indications of future cuts. So is that still on the table for the future?
Yeah, really, the main question is that people went into this meeting with is what will the Federal Reserve do with interest rates later this year? So I think everybody just assumed or believed that there would be no rate cut yesterday, and there wasn't. Keep in mind that we're talking about short-term interest rates, so this would be the thing that directly impacts things like if you have a line of credit, usually those are tied, essentially indirectly tied to this this measure that the Federal Reserve is moving. It also impacts long-term interest rates, but long-term interest rates, the market guesses what this one will be in the future. So we've seen long-term rates come down even without Federal Reserve action, because the market expects the Federal Reserve to reduce interest rates. Okay, so coming in, there was an expectation that that was set by Jerome Powell himself, the chair of the Federal Reserve, that there will be up to 3 interest rate cuts totaling 75 basis points or 0.75% throughout this year. The market, there's actually markets that kind of better essentially predictive markets on when this will happen. It was about a 50-50 shot that would happen in March, that the first rate cut would happen in March. So in a meeting in about a month. And the chair pretty much dashed those hopes, had indicated that not to expect a rate cut in March, that it said that it was unlikely that they would have the data that they need or enough information to feel comfortable to start it then. So I felt like at the end of the year, I think you might recall that I said that the Federal Reserve was surprisingly explicit about setting expectations for rate cuts, multiple rate cuts in the year 2024. Now that we're here, I felt like he was trying to reel that in a little bit. Not that rate cuts wouldn't happen. I'm very, very confident that rate cuts will happen. But to temper those expectations, to say that depending on how data comes in, they might have to go slower, they might have to go later, or they might have to do both, slower and later. But what I didn't hear him say is anything to say that maybe we won't cut rates this year. That was not part of the announcement. So a few of the things that they're looking at. I mean, GDP was really solid last year, so they feel pretty good that as inflation has come down to below 4%, after being way up at 8 or 9% before. That interest rate or inflation has come down and GDP has stayed strong. Unemployment was last year was between 3 and 4%. I mean, there was all of these measures are in pretty good positions. But I think it does beg the question to the Federal Reserve. Well, if everything's going okay, inflation's coming down, the economy is still strong, why change anything right now? And I think that's really what it comes down to is like, wow, if employment is staying strong, inflation is heading in the right direction, and GDP is positive. In fact, right where you'd want to see a country like the U.S. in terms of the GDP, why mess with it? And so here's the why. And it's because interest rates they don't impact things in a vacuum. So when interest rates are at the overnight interest rate, the one that the Federal Reserve sets, is 5.25% to 5.5%, and inflation is that high or higher, the impact that higher interest rates have is dampened by the fact that there's a nominal versus real rate there. So the cost of borrowing is higher, but the future cost of repaying is lower because of inflation. So because you're paying back with inflated dollars. So at a time, though, when interest rates are higher and inflation is below that interest rate, that means that the real economic impact of the higher rates gets greater. So I think there is a concern that even though everything's okay now, and it looks like, you know, a good kind of soft landing to a normalcy in the U.S. economy, that if they leave the rates too high for too long, the relative impact of those higher rates could be harsh on the economy, more harsh in the future because inflation is lower. And that is, so really, I think that's the argument. At the end of the day, that argument will win. It's just a matter of when. And so I'm kind of not expecting a rate cut at their March meeting at this point, based on those comments. But I think, as we've also shared previously, that this is an election year, and there's just a thing like rate cut. There are rate cuts in election years. That's just how it has been through administrations on either side of the aisle.
All right, well, certainly something that you are keeping a very close eye on, and we appreciate your insight. Let's talk about some key tax policy issues next. There's two that SBAM has been involved in, one we liked and one we didn't. Let's talk about the one we do like, which took effect on January 1st, and that is the Earned Income Tax Credit.
Earned Income Tax Credit. So this is essentially a reward or tax credit that is only available to people with earned income, in other words, people with jobs. And the way that it's a federal tax credit, the state kind of piggybacks on. And so what the state did effective January 1st of this year is to increase the state's portion of the earned income tax credit for low-income workers. And that went from 6% of the federal credit. So anybody who claims this credit, they got to figure it at the federal level. And the way the state credit works is whatever you get at the federal level, we'll give you an extra 6%. That got moved all the way up to 30%. So whatever your federal credit is, and for some families, it's thousands of dollars, you can get a 30% add-on at the state level. That is now in effect for this year. Now, why did SBAM support that last year? Number one, we want to encourage people to work, but also, as people have some reliance on social services, one of the big problems that we face is that sometimes there's a disincentive for people to go back to work, because as they make more money, they qualify for less, and they don't necessarily get any further ahead. The Earned Income Tax Credit is one of the things that changes the math on that. So as a person is working, even at jobs that have lower earning potential, as they take on more hours, get promotions, and get raises, that, yeah, they're losing social services and there's some value to that, but they're gaining more of this Earned Income Tax Credit at the federal and the state level. So it's a way to incentivize work and to take the edge off the disincentive that some of our social services an unintended consequence of some of our social services.
All right, and now let's do an update on the tax policy issue that we don't like, which was the rollback of the income tax rate. We have covered this issue extensively on the briefing for the last year, but there is some court action related to the issue that we want to update you on.
So in the main income tax rate, which for small businesses, most small businesses, that's the business tax, that's pass-through entities. It at the beginning of the year, as we covered before, it popped back up to 4.25%. We disputed that. A lot of organizations disputed that it should have, when it rolled back last year, it should have stayed lower. But with an Attorney General opinion and Treasury following that opinion, they did increase the rate back up to 4.25% starting January 1st. There are some plaintiffs who have filed a lawsuit. As expected, the initial court, the Court of Claims, this set of plaintiffs that were trying to keep the rate lower, lost at the Court of Claims, appealed and asked the Supreme Court, since it's like tax collections are already happening this year, asked the Supreme Court to bypass the Court of Appeals. Not surprisingly, the Supreme Court did not accept a kind of hopscotch over the Court of Appeals. They almost never do. In all my time paying attention, I think I've only seen it once with like you see it sometimes like in election issues, like there's a dispute on something making the ballot language or something like that, and there's an election coming up and there's just not time, so they have to take it up. I've seen it in those cases, but in these types of cases where it's, there's a law dispute and it's just not resolved, they almost never take it up. However, the Michigan Supreme Court, while they didn't grant the bypass, did direct the Court of Appeals to hear the appeal on an abbreviated briefing schedule. So in other words, they asked them to take it up very quickly and expeditiously. So that this question now goes to the Court of Appeals. When the rate got reduced last year, is it permanent or not? The state is saying, no, it's not. And it's about a $600 million difference. So the state wants $600 million for its general fund. And of course, the taxpayers who are the plaintiffs, and also some people in the legislature that are disputing this interpretation are part of the plaintiff group as well. So we'll keep a close eye on that. At the end of the day, I don't expect that plaintiffs probably will win, just kind of looking at the makeup of the Supreme Court and kind of the politics around all these issues. But ultimately it's going to play out. And the fact that the Supreme Court ordered or asked, I should say, the Court of Appeals to take it up on an abbreviated schedule means that, to me, that says that they're taking it at least seriously.
All right. So President Biden is with the UAW in Michigan today. This relationship kind of had a bit of a slow start. So is today's visit a sign that maybe it's warming up a bit? Yeah,
it is. The UAW endorsed President Biden, but they really made him wait for a while. It's not exactly clear what changed from when they did and when they didn't. But now, I think with that kind of out of the way, it was kind of a matzo ball hanging out there for the president in terms of being in Michigan and the UAW not supporting his reelection campaign. So he's in Michigan today, and then it's kind of on the heels of a lot of tensions in a different part of Southeast Michigan, Dearborn area, with the Arab American dissatisfaction with his handling over issues relating to Israel. And this is going to be kind of a complicated political landscape for the president moving forward. And at the same time, this transition to electric vehicles, which Michigan is at the epicenter of, and our state has been pretty involved in incentivizing to move forward. You see some pullback happening, and you also see among auto workers some concern or trepidation that this is going to displace a lot of auto workers, this transition is. It's actually one of the reasons the UAW had withheld their support for President Biden's reelection campaign. And it was always a foregone conclusion. They were always going to get there. But the idea of making a statement like, there's a lot of workers who are that could be displaced, and what are you going to do about it? I mean, that was the big question. I think it's still a pretty open question. You are definitely seeing President Biden's opponent, President Trump, lean into this argument. And so I think that Michigan, which is already has gained a reputation as a swing state in presidential politics, that this argument over the electric vehicle transition, the impact on workers, it reminds me, it's kind of reminiscent to the free trade debates that happened a generation ago with respect to North American free trade and how many jobs will go to Mexico, that sort of thing. Like this argument that there's a bunch of workers that right now have a living in the future that will be put at risk. Michigan will be the epicenter of that debate, and it will be an issue at the national political level. So I would expect this to be a place where both of the presumptive nominees of the two parties spend a lot of time and where a lot of energy and focus is in a place that really it hasn't been for a while. For a while, it seemed like this electric vehicle debate and push was one that did not, there wasn't a lot of pushback on per se. There was always some, but it wasn't like it will. There's nothing like a presidential election where you have these kind of titans that go at each other. A key Michigan issue will be in the center of all that.
All right, we'll keep an eye on that too. So earlier this week, there were two special elections held to fill the vacant House of Representatives seats. SBAM endorsed candidates in both those elections, and we were successful. So give us a little recap.
Yeah, we were really delighted with the outcomes of these elections. So SBAM does get involved in elections. So we're a bipartisan organization. We are not nonpartisan. We are bipartisan. That means that we get involved in politics, but we identify and support candidates based on issues, not on party. And so in this case, these are two seats that are very, very heavily weighted among the electorate for Democrats. So the whoever wins the Democratic primary in these special elections will go on to win the seat almost certainly in a few months. So these are open seats, and so there were very active campaigns. One of them was not particularly exciting because there was one candidate that led. It was a candidate that SBAM likes, and we think that we're going to be able to work really well with. Her name is My Song, and it's in the Warren area of Macomb County, and she won like with 80% of the vote. So it was a runaway victory in the Democratic Party. She will go on to win in a few months. So that was one that was we kind of viewed it like a foregone conclusion. We could tell who was going to win. And the other race, though, was Westland and Wayne, in the city of Wayne and the city of Westland. So you look Wayne County, everybody knows about Wayne County, but there's a city called Wayne as well. So anyway, these two cities make up this state representative district. The person who held this seat before went on to become mayor, left the seat vacant. So there was many candidates that ran in this one, and it wasn't clear who was going to win, but it was clear who we would support as we investigated. There was a city council member. His name is Peter Hersberg, and Peter's one of the strongest pro small business candidates we've come across in a long time. So we were pretty excited about his candidacy. So we did support and endorse him. The race did, while there were several people that ran, the race came down to really three people that kind of separated themselves out from the pack. One that was a staffer of Rashida Tlaib, who is a far left, kind of anti-business, definitely does not line up with our issues. And so that was definitely, that was a candidate that didn't even fill out our questionnaire because I think she knew that it wasn't, that there wouldn't be alignment. But the other candidate that ran had the support of the UAW and the governor. So Andrea Rakowski, and she had a lot of good things going for her candidacy too. But Peter was just so strong pro small business. And so we supported him, and he had a great ground game and ended up coming out on top at about 35% of the vote. Rakowski came in second at 29% of the vote, and then there were several other candidates that all took a piece. So both SBAM candidates came out on top, and when those special elections happen, the election or the 54-54 tie in the House today will go back to a 56-54 advantage for Democrats. But we do feel like we've got some, on certain issues, certainly we got two advocates for SBAM's positions on important issues. And one of them in particular, just like I said, one of the closest aligned with small business that I've seen in a long time.
All right. Well, yeah, really great news there. So obviously, this is an election year, and so candidates are doing a lot of fundraising. And yesterday, filing reports for both federal and state were due. So we have a lot of kind of data to assess here. Let's start with the Michigan's House of Representatives and the Republican and Democratic caucuses. What do their efforts show?
Yeah, more and more, and who holds the majority in the legislature, it's not based, the candidates, it's based on the candidates, but like in terms of where the spending happens, where the money is raised, it's their political party caucuses. So the House Republicans have a campaign fund, the House Democrats have a campaign fund, and how well they do in fundraising has a lot to say with how well the candidates do later on. So this is something that we watch really closely. And at state level politics, it's the biggest show in town in the next election. All 110 races are up. There are fewer open seats because remember, term limits got extended in our Constitution in the previous election. So we probably will not see a lot of open seats where there's no incumbent involved. So where does it stand? The Michigan House Democratic Fund raised about $4.4 million in 2023. So this was the filing where you can reveal in total the performance and fundraising for the previous year, $4.4 million, and the House Republicans raised $4.2 million. So very, very close in terms of their overall fundraising for the entire year. Republicans had a cash on hand advantage. And that of the 4.2 million raised, they actually still had 4.1 million on hand. So they've spent almost nothing out of the fund, and that just means a lot of shoe leather that they weren't necessarily using, a lot of consultants and paying fees and things. The House Democrats had 3.5 million on hand. It's not unusual to see a majority caucus have like more of a beefed up staff or more expensive overhead. And I suspect that's what the case was there. So very even when it came to fundraising, but it does look like the Republicans were able to hold on to more of what they raised coming out of the blocks for next election. So as the caucuses go, very even, maybe a slight advantage there for the Republicans.
All right, and obviously there are individual filings made as well, and there's going to be some highly competitive races. So who is coming out on top with their fundraising efforts? Yeah,
so those are the caucuses. Then you have 110 individual races in the House of Representatives all across Michigan, by definition, everywhere in Michigan. And only certain races out of those would be competitive. So if you were to look at the most competitive races, the Democrats have the majority. More of those, by definition, that means more of those seats are held by Democrats, and so and they have an incumbency advantage. So you did see at the individual candidate level, you see the Democrats had a little more of an edge than over the Republican challengers. So at the caucus level, slight advantage to Republicans. At the individual candidate level, looks like slight advantage to the Democrats.
All right, and Governor Whitmer is not running for office, but she is a prolific fundraiser, using those funds to support candidates at all levels of government. So how did she do in her efforts this year?
So the governor has had a state level political action committee for a while, but then she started a federal committee in addition to that. So she was raising money last year into two political action committees, one to help federal candidates, one to help state level candidates. In total, between the two, she raised about $3 million. So that's quite a bit. The $2 million of it went to what's called the Fight Like Hell PAC. So that's the federal one, and there were a couple of notable donations into it, and a couple of notable expenditures out of it. Melissa Gates, ex-wife of Microsoft founder Bill Gates, was one of the donors. Some higher profile Hollywood type, so just definitely some national fundraising efforts into that, but made a maximum contribution of, I think it's $47,000 some $100 to the Biden campaign, but also made contributions to congressional races. So the governor's federal PAC had a really strong launch out of the blocks here with a couple $1 million, and I think, what was it? Maybe 1.3. I don't see. I didn't write it down apparently, but I think about 1.3 million of that 2 million still on hand. And then she has another PAC called the Building Bridges PAC. That's the state level one, and that raised just over $1 million for the year, and that's the one that would go toward helping state level candidates and presumably focus at the House of Representatives. So Remember when I said just a few minutes ago that at the caucus level, the Republicans had a bit of an advantage? Well, Governor Whitmer's political action committee, which has $1 million in it, raised $1 million last year, actually wouldn't necessarily have that much on hand. Let's see. I should have written down the current balances. I just didn't think of it. But anyway, that's a counterbalance. So the Republicans had that advantage at the state level caucus political action committee. Presumably, the governor will use some of her state PAC to counteract some of that advantage. So really, to me, at the state level, it looks awfully even. Like they're just going to really duke it out. And in the background of this, you have the Citizens Redistricting Commission, which will redraw some of the lines in Southeast Michigan. I do not expect that will create a big political advantage either way. I think it might create a modest, and I want to underscore modest improvement in the Republicans' prospects to take the House back, but probably not much. Probably just a few seats where it might a percentage or two toward the Republican advantage. I think the big winners in the redrawing the maps are Detroiters. So it's not that you'll have more Republicans or Democrats in the legislature, but I think most certainly will have more legislators from Detroit. That's, I think, the biggest difference. That's the most likely outcome, and maybe just a little bit of a tiny improvement in the prospects for Republicans with the redrawing of those maps. So I think this will be a nail biter right to the end when it comes to legislative majority looking at these fundraising results.
Okay, next up is the open Senate seat here in Michigan, the U.S. Senate seat. And let's start with the Republican candidates and their efforts for fundraising.
Debbie Stabenow is not running for re-election, opens up a Senate seat. Wide open Senate seat is not something that happens every day, and so naturally that has attracted candidates on both sides of the aisle. Among the Republicans, there's several candidates, but there's a few that are kind of like standouts, if you will, when it comes to their profile and their ability to raise money or their ability to self-fund. So Mike Rogers, in terms of raising dollars, Mike Rogers raised the most outside, not including self-funders. So Rogers came in at about $1 million. And then number $2 million raised last year. Remember, he was only in for part of last year. He wasn't a candidate all year. So $1 million in a pretty short period of time. So Rogers kind of on top, if you will, on the Republican side. Peter Meyer, so former Congressman Peter Meyer, raised $415,000. And a portion of that, I think about $100,000, was money that he personally put into the race. Another name that has been out there for a while is James Craig. James Craig did hardly raise anything, $60,000. And so there's some signs that he might drop out of the race. I kind of expect that he will. And then Sandy Pensler put $1 million in himself. So he ran against Stabenow he wanted to run against Stabenow, lost in the primary to John James in 2018. Back this time, put $1 million into the race. So really, to me, on the Republican side, based on the money, it's a race between Meyer and Pensler and Rogers. And then the other kind of X factor out there is Justin Amash. So former Congressman Justin Amash has formed an exploratory committee, but not in time for there to be any kind of fundraising activity. So there was no report required of him yet because he's still in the exploratory phase. So that race really shaping up to be a 3-horse race, but maybe a 4th gets in later on if Justin Amash jumps in.
All right, so let's check in with the Democrats.
Alyssa Slotkin is dominating, not a surprise. So member of Congress and was a prolific fundraiser in Congress. If you add up all the reporting of last year, $10.4 million Just let that sink in for a minute. $10.4 million. So that's a lot. So in the final period of last year alone, $2.77 million. So she's spent $1.7 million so far in six. So sits on a pile of cash. The other candidate in that race, Hill Harper, and there's Nasser Beydoun is also in that race too, but they had 457,000 and 303,000 in donations respectively. But I mean, when you're 10 million raised by Slotkin, it's difficult for me to say with a straight face. I think that's going to be a competitive election. I think the Democrats, that side is a foregone conclusion. It's going to be Alyssa Slotkin. The question is which Republican she's going to face.
All right. And finally, let's check in with the candidates for president and their fundraising.
At the presidential level, the numbers, of course, get really, really big. The Biden campaign has raised the most of all the candidates for president at $46 million. They raised $46 million cash on hand at this reporting period, and then President Trump with $33 million. So a lot of money, both. And then other kind of notable things to mention. Nikki Haley's campaign, while it's, I think it's hard to imagine what her path forward is going to be, but she has $14 million, which means that she can stay in the race for a prolonged period of time, or maybe she'll spend it all in South Carolina, which is the next race. It's a big enough state where you could drop some serious dollars there. Ron DeSantis, what really popped out to me though, Ron DeSantis, who has dropped out of the race now, his race last year lasted about a year, $160 million. That's quite a bit. That's more than like in the year 2000 when George Bush and Al Gore were facing off. Neither of them on their presidential election spent, they just cracked over $100 million. So they didn't get close to just what DeSantis spent just on a year leading up to a presidential election, let alone the entire campaign. Give you an idea of how much more expensive campaigns are in 2024 than just a political generation ago.
All right, so I know we're bumping up on time, but Brian, I want you to give a little plug for the SBAM Small Biz PAC. We've talked about all of this money going directly to candidates, but talk about how we can use our funds to really help push the small business agenda here in Michigan.
We have a political action committee, and we only get involved at the state level, so we don't make contributions at the federal level. State policy is an area that we really can make an impact on. And so we have a very extensive process of vetting and evaluating candidates and then holding them accountable throughout their service. Some of the things that we have been most concerned about over the last year that ended up not happening are because we have these strong relationships across the political spectrum. And but part of it is that pro small business, it's a lot easier to communicate with somebody who's pro small business in the first place, right? So we just want to make sure that people that get elected see, understand, appreciate, and support small businesses and their owners. So we're very proud of our political efforts here. You will not see us sensationalize our issues. We stay very professional, very respectful in the way that we deal with in and around the political system, and we're very, very effective. I can confidently say that in these special elections, I think we're going to see some strong allies. That SBAM's Political Action Committee and the work that we do there, it made a difference. And so if you've never supported our political operation, our Political Action Committee, I would encourage you to do so. We have a couple different options. We've got a Political Action Committee that can take corporate dollars, business dollars, and then we've got one that's for personal contributions for those that would rather keep it personal. Both can be very effective in making sure that the playing field where these rules are set is level for small business owners, so that we've got people that we don't have to convince that small businesses are important and worthy of our support, but already believe that on day one when they walk into office.
All right, well, thanks for that. And we will share the link to the webpage where you can make a contribution if you so choose. That is all we have for you today. Thanks for tuning in. We will be back here Monday at 3 p.m.
Thanks, everybody. See you on Monday.